Am I through with the search for the perfect ideal symbiosis? Is one ever through with a longing so profound as that one? Susan Sontag. We lose our heads but not our appetites. In love we eat each other up. Part of love's vocabulary is gustatorial. It consumes and devours, it swallows or else desires to be swallowed up. Like the lion tamer who rests her hand in her familiar's jaw, we play at eating each other's bodies. We bite but we don't kill. We eat each other, but in such a way that the meal is inexhaustible. For Simone Weil, such appetites are not just physical, but also spiritual and existential. Weil understood humanity as a cannibalistic economy that routinely eats its kin for nourishment. We love as cannibals, Weil wrote. Beloved beings provide us with comfort, energy, a stimulant. They have the same effect on us as a good meal after an exhausting day of work. We love them, then, as food. It's an anthropophagic love. The idea of eating God, albeit not so plainly put, is central in Christian ritual practices such as the Eucharist, in which Christ's body and blood is shared as bread and wine to symbolize his sacrifice. In Catholic orthodoxy, the rite is not symbolic but transformative. The tenet of transubstantiation holds that during the ceremony the bread and wine become Christ's flesh and blood incarnate, not their mere representatives. To this devotional consumption, Weil wedded another dynamic, a God who also eats us. Drawing on passages from the Bhagavad Gita, Weil shaped her understanding of a ravenous deity. Man eats God and is eaten by God. While she believed cannibalism was the force underpinning human relations, Weil also maintained that we are required to overcome it. We must shift our status as eaters to becoming the eaten. In being eaten by God, we are metabolized to become nourishing food for other human beings, breaking the cannibalistic cycle. Weil longed to be devoured by God in this way, but at 34 she was also consumed by the bacillus which killed her, Mycobacterium tuberculosis, a condition known colloquially as consumption. It is interesting to consider whether Weil's radical economy might extend to the non-human, an understanding of the body offered up to nourish other forms of life. In view of Weil's inversion, does infection go some way to breaking the cannibalistic cycle? In becoming food for other species, might we gesture towards renouncing our heterotrophic appetites? We fear the intrusion of a pathogen inside our bodies because we fear its capacity to eat us up, leaving nothing left. Yet the fear of being eaten up to death is perhaps an unhelpful horizon line, overlooking the teeming gardens of our bodies, which are already feeding and housing a myriad of viruses and bacteria. In the fabled Elysium of good health, we are always already food for something else. When Weil wrote of humanity's need to become the eaten instead of the eaters, she was perhaps tapping into this symbiotic entanglement with other species. In the non-human world, perhaps the best known of devouring lovers, much beloved by the surrealists, is the praying mantis. For André Masson, Max Ernst, and others, the mantis was an invocation of erotic violence, epitomized by the female mantis's beheading and consumption of the male during coitus. Informed by burgeoning ideas in psychoanalysis, To the surrealist mind, this cannibalistic mating ritual made visible the unconscious, i.e., violent, drives underlying sexual desire. Early naturalists were also fascinated by the observations of sexual cannibalism among Mantidae species. In 1886, L. O. Howard described what happened upon introducing a male Mantis carolina to a solitary female that had been kept as a pet. She first bit off his left tarsus and consumed the tibia and femur. Next, she gnawed out his left eye. At this, the male seemed to realize his proximity to one of the opposite sex and began to make vain endeavors to mate. The female next ate up his right front leg and then entirely decapitated him, devouring his head and gnawing into his thorax. Not until she had eaten all of his thorax except 3 millimeters did she stop to rest. All this while the male had continued his vain attempts to obtain entrance at the valvules, and he now succeeded, as she voluntarily spread the parts open, and union took place. The next morning she had entirely rid herself of her spouse, and nothing but his wings remained. Later research uncovered that not only was copulation still possible in the wake of dismemberment, but that decapitation actually improved the male mantis's sexual performance, severing the subesophageal ganglion, which inhibits the copulatory movements of the abdomen. K.D. Roeder's experiments in 1935 demonstrated that decapitation of the female doesn't improve her sexual performance, but in the case of a pair where both male and female are headless, actual copula results sooner than when both insects are intact. Many studies report that the male and female stay in this fused position, in copula, for a period of around 4 hours. Although subsequent research has shown that sexual cannibalism occurs regularly amongst Mantidae species kept in labs or as pets, and has much less frequently been observed in the wild, the mantis's proximity of sex, devouring, and death is far from unique or perverse by the standards of multicellular life. As complex organisms, cannibalistic sex can be found at the earliest stirrings of our sexual ancestry, when starved, single-celled organisms began to fuse out of desperation, resulting in what Lynn Margulis has called a truce called sex. Billions of years ago, before ancestors of algae discovered they could eat the sun, the earth was covered in an orgiastic mass of single-celled prokaryotic life. Bacteria and archaea writhed in the stink of an anaerobic atmosphere, noxious with the fumes of ammonia, sulfide, and hydrocarbons. It was in the hothouse bends of this primordial latrine, before the planet clothed itself in layers of oxygen and ozone, that sex first began to stir. According to Lynn Margulis, it began with bacteria whose DNA was damaged by the sun, and who sought to replace their damaged genomes with DNA from each other. They lived and died short lives, as bacteria do, and reproduced asexually by mitosis, a process in which one cell replicates its DNA before splitting into 2 genetically identical cells. Around 1.2 billion years ago, another form of reproduction emerged, meiosis, which eventually gave rise to the sexual reproduction of plants, animals, and fungi. Margulis writes that meiosis evolved through a process of abortive cannibalism among early protoctists, single-celled, freshwater-dwelling organisms, during periods of environmental stress and starvation. While protoctists are capable of reproducing asexually via mitosis, in severely pressurized circumstances they have been observed to eat each other, to fuse, rather than die alone. This process of fusion is not consumption and digestion as we would recognize it. Rather, one organism engulfs another, taking on its energy reserves but also its cumbersome genetic material. As Margulis puts it, in general, doubling the body, especially the chromosome numbers, is a hindrance. You'd probably yearn for relief from your condition as double monster. Relief arose in the splitting stage of meiosis, producing new daughter cells that are genetically distinct to the parent cell. Human sex is meiotic sex, the roots of which stretched back to the abortive cannibalism of our single-celled ancestors. We might not engulf each other's fully grown bodies, but the same cellular fusion resulting from abortive cannibalism among protoctists occurs between the human sex cells. It might be that members of the order of Mantidae and other species that practice sexual cannibalism are a little more in touch with these evolutionary chords. Or perhaps, in our vocabulary of swallowing and eating each other up, in sex and in love, we are voicing ancestral muscle memory, ventriloquized by the biological unconscious. When the characters in Plato's Symposium take turns to discourse on the nature of love, they provide an unlikely allegory for meiosis. In Aristophanes' famous speech on the origins of love, he describes how in ancient days there were 3 forms of human, male, female, and hermaphrodite. Their bodies were not like our bodies, but rounded like a ball with 4 arms and 4 legs, and 2 faces mounted either side of a cylindrical neck. Everything else we can imagine of their bodies had its opposite: 2 noses, 4 ears, 2 sets of genitals. They walked on all 4 legs, but thanks to their plenitude of limbs were also able to roll around by cartwheeling. They had genitals but reproduced like crickets, springing out from the ground. Aristophanes explains that due to their strength and vivacity, they fell foul to a familiar strain of loftiness and sought to overthrow the gods. As punishment for this audacity, Zeus decided to spare the humans but lessen their strength by dividing them in 2, reasoning that the division not only weakens them, but that their resulting multiplicity will make them more useful to him. He warns the humans that if they seek further disruption, he will divide them again so that each will go around hopping on 1 leg, a quarter of their original bodies. Aristophanes describes Zeus's method of division as a wire used to slice an egg or sorb apple. He then orders Apollo to twist each human's head to the side where the division was made, and pulls in their sides to make a neat seam at the belly button. According to Aristophanes, these halved humans experienced the first stirrings of desire. They couldn't get over their sense of having lost their wholeness, and exhausted themselves by searching for and attempting to refuse with their other halves. In their yearning to be grafted together, Aristophanes explains, they began to perish of hunger and general indolence through refusing to do anything apart. In these embraces, the halved humans were dropping like flies. Zeus pitied their longing and so intervened one last time, moving their genitals from their backs to their fronts, so that when each half embraced its other, they were able to mate. Aristophanes is keen to emphasize that this was not purely for the purpose of reproduction. Like organisms who are capable of both sexual and asexual reproduction, he writes that male and female halves could propagate each other, while same-sexed pairs found relief and satisfaction in their union. Aristophanes' discourse on love might be figured as a classical rebuttal of reproduction as the destiny of sex and love. The authority of the gods manifested through Zeus acts like a selective pressure in evolution, first doubling and then halving the humans' bodies. The union of the halved humans with genitals on their backs formed something of a propagule or dormant cyst, what Margulis describes as a fused structure in which to wait out starvation and the harsh conditions of winter. Spring arrives in the form of Zeus's rearrangement of morphology. Genitals on their fronts is akin to warm weather, ushering in sex which allows them to fuse through intimacy and sate their cellular memory of being more than one. The fusion of human sex is a fleeting rather than permanent alloy of bodies. We do not stay in position for life. Or perhaps fusion is displaced into what sex can create: experience, intimacy, connection, relationship. In the psychoanalytic work of Melanie Klein, the notion of permanent sexual fusion has been explored as a source of terror. In one account, her patient Richard, an 11-year-old boy suffering from extreme anxiety, admits his fears in relation to what he understands of his parents' sexual intercourse. Richard asked if they were stuck together like Siamese twins, Klein reports. Richard says it must be terrible for those twins if they could never get away from each other. Klein goes on to interpret Richard's anxiety about his parents' fusion in terms of his own burgeoning sexuality. Perhaps he fears that by penetrating another's body with his own genitals, they will become stuck irreversibly. He might never get them out again. Richard's anxiety or curiosity might also have been quelled by studying the anatomy of Schistosoma species. These worms are parasitic blood flukes that live in the blood vessels of the bladder, large intestine, or small intestine of their human hosts. Like the permanently fused parents of Richard's trepidation, once mated, the adult male and female pair of schistosoma worms are joined together in copula for life. The smaller female is threaded through the body of the male, woven into his gynecophoric canal. Their conjoined bodies form a two-headed ouroboros, a closed circuit, a never-ending coitus. In this knotted position, the schistosoma couple live out their allotted lifespan in the human body, not quite to infinity, but in some cases for up to 40 years. Schistosoma worms derive their name from the Greek for divided body. As a species, they appear to have accepted the offer that Hephaestus, god of metallurgy, makes to humans at the end of Aristophanes' speech in the Symposium. Upon seeing the humans' delight in their newfound sexuality, Hephaestus observes that each pairing seems to desire permanent fusion. Laying out his blacksmithing tools, Hephaestus offers his services. Do you desire to be joined in the closest possible union, so that you shall not be divided by night or by day? If that is your craving, I am ready to fuse and weld you together in a single piece, that from being two you may be made one, that so long as you live, the pair of you, being as one, may share a single life, and that when you die you may also in Hades be one instead of two, having shared a single death. The humans are not given a chance to answer, as Aristophanes has only fabricated Hephaestus' offer with the intention of proving a point. If such an offer were to be made, Aristophanes intimates that the humans would accept it, desiring to return to the wholeness of their former estate. In his focus on a life of wholeness, it is perhaps easy to skim over the underside of Hephaestus' offer, the destiny of a shared death. As newly meiotic organisms, perhaps the early humans of Aristophanes' speech intuited the molecular bond between sex and death. Lynn Margulis claims that when meiosis gave rise to more complex organisms, with greater lifespans and elaborate tissues, the cost was programmed mortality. While earlier organisms such as bacteria are able to be killed by starvation, desiccation, or toxicity, such environmental destruction is different to having an inbuilt schedule for decay and death. Complex development in protoctists and their animal and plant descendants, Margulis writes, led to the evolution of death as a kind of sexually transmitted disease. Whether or not we take up Hephaestus's offer, as intermittently fusing humans or permanently fusing schistosomes, death and aging are the culmination of a shared sexuality, completing the meiotic circle of life.